This walkthrough is going to be about static site generation, but I want to start off by looking at a very traditional application that generates pages dynamically. And so this application just reads data in from a MongoDB Atlas collection and displays it on an index page, and you can click through each of the items and get a detailed page of each of those items. So I'm going to start by cloning the project. And maybe we'll just have a quick look at the code. It's pretty straightforward. And the important piece are the roots for the index page and the course detail page. So we'll look at the index page first. And what this does is when the index page is requested, I have this database function getCourses, which fetches all the courses from the MongoDB table. That produces a result array of all of the courses and their attributes, and then it sends that result array to the render function. So I've got a template for the index. It has a title attribute as well, plus this result array listing all the courses. And if we look at the view for that, so for the index page, you can see there's the standard HTML stuff. It generates a table with a fixed header, but inside the body of the table we have this loop. It iterates over all the results in the array, and for each of those results it displays the course subject, the course number, and the title as well for that course. So if we're going to run this application, I'll run npm install. And the other thing I should mention about this application is, so it requires access to a database. The database is running on MongoDB Atlas, so MongoDB's cloud offering. So we're going to need to supply this application with the credentials required to access that database. And so if we look at the database module, and the important piece I want to draw your attention to here is the use of environment variables. So we're going to need to identify the database and the credentials. So I have two environment variables here. MongoDB name, that is just the simple name of the database inside MongoDB. And the other environment variable we're going to be using is MongoDB URI, and that is the URI string that contains all the information required to access the database. So the format of that environment variable, it's going to be MongoDB plus serve, then the username, the password, and the host name, all those elements that are required to access the database. And so we would need to set that up in advance. So you would have to, in your case, if you're working through this yourself, you would have to set these environment variables appropriately to point to your database. I've already set them up here in my environment. So now I can go ahead and run the application. And so I'm going to set the port, additionally I'm going to set the port environment variable, so we'll run it on 8080 so I can preview it, the debug environment variable, and I'm going to run the development script which uses nodemon. Oops, did I not install? Oh, wrong directory. Okay, there we go. And now we can preview the application. Port 8080. And there it is. It lists all the courses or all the items in the database, provides a link to each one, and then you get the detailed information about that document. And the other thing I should point out here, just to emphasize once again, so these pages are generated dynamically. So for each of the course detail pages, we have a dynamic route. So if I go into the app, you can see here there's three main routes for the application: the root, the course route, the user's route, which we're not really using. And if we look at the course route, so this is for the detailed page for a single course, you can see the URL pattern there. So it's going to begin with /course, and then there's a parameter for the subject component and a parameter for the course number component. So this is a dynamic route, and depending on whatever the user clicks on, this page is going to be generated dynamically. So for a particular course, English 1127 or ENGL 1127, it would pick the information about that course. If it was another course, CPSC 1030, it would pick the information about that course. And the course detail page works pretty much the same way as the index page. So again, it calls us this database function get courses that I've written. It passes in a search query. So we want, in this case, not the entire list of courses, but we want a single course matching the one that is the value for the subject parameter and the value for the course number parameter. So that will typically only match a single course. So yeah, that's an application, a very traditional application with dynamic page generation based on the values that appear in the URL string. The application connects to the database, fetches the database, and renders the page dynamically. And if you think about what this means for an application like this for a list of courses, what you can imagine is there is a bit of a disparity between how often these pages are requested and how often they are modified. So in the particular case of a course calendar, an online course calendar for a college or university, the course information changes, but it changes relatively infrequently compared to how frequently it's accessed. So certainly courses are changing over time. The course calendar entry gets updated, new courses get added, courses get removed, and things like that. But those changes are infrequent in comparison to how often the courses are read, for example, by prospective students. So thousands of students, or maybe not thousands, but 1,000 or hundreds of students request the information about a particular course, but the course data itself doesn't change that often. And so that's why we're going to look at static site generation in this walkthrough. And the reason for that is there are a lot of web applications where we don't need to generate the page dynamically every single time. The data is relatively static, and it can be more efficient to statically generate the site and serve up the static HTML rather than having every request have to go through a database and through dynamically rendering the page. So that's what we're going to look at today. But I wanted to show the conventional application just so we could contrast it. Okay, so I'm going to close this up. And what we're going to do now is use a static site generator. We're going to be there are a number of different static site generators available. We're going to be looking at the Gatsby static site generator just to use as an example. We're going to be using the same underlying database, but instead of having an application that's going to generate those pages dynamically, we are going to read the information from the database and pre-generate all the static HTML files for the course catalog. And the first thing I'm going to do is, I'll stop that application running and go back to my home directory. And I've already done it, but you would need to install the Gatsby command line interface. So I'll show you the command for that. I'm not going to run it because I've already got it myself. So it looks like that. So your normal npm install -g to install it globally, and the Gatsby CLI. I already have a skeleton project in GitLab that you can use to get started with that, and so I'll just navigate to that, and it's here, and we'll clone that. And we'll start running this project. So I'll go into the project directory, npm install, and then I'm going to run the application. So also on port 8080, the Google Cloud Shell preview port, the Gatsby CLI command Gatsby, and we're going to run the development version of the server. Maybe I did not install it, so I guess I should do that. Okay, so running on port 8080 and the development version of the application. And this will take a little bit of time to start up. While we're waiting, maybe I'll just show you quickly what the data looks like in MongoDB Atlas. So this is the collection for the 5 courses that we saw in the application. So nothing particularly exciting here. This is the shape of these documents. So they have a subject, course, title, credits, and description field. And the subject, title, and description, those are strings, and course and credits are numbers. Okay, and now the application is running, and so I can preview it. And again, this is the skeleton application. But by the time we're finished with this exercise, it will fill in the table with all the courses. But right now, it's just got the skeleton for the application. And the first thing we are going to have to do is configure the application to access the MongoDB database. And so we are going to need an extra module for that, the Gatsby source MongoDB module. So I'm going to install that in the project. And the next thing we have to do is configure the application to access that module, or in this case it's a plugin. It's a Gatsby plugin used for accessing MongoDB. And plugins are configured in the Gatsby config.js file, so we'll open up that. By default, there are no plugins installed, and so now I'm going to add the code to configure that plugin. And there it is. And so we supplied the name of the plugin, Gatsby source MongoDB, and any options that are going to be required. The most important one, well, these are all important, but the most important ones are, again, the MongoDB URI. This is the same format as for the last application, and also the MongoDB name as well, same format as for the previous application. So that's going to allow the plugin to connect to the MongoDB database, and we are also going to identify the collection. So within that database, it's the courses collection, and then some additional parameters that are required when making the connection to the database. So I can go ahead and save that. And I'm going to restart the server. Hopefully it'll be a bit quicker this time. And the next thing we're going to use is, I mean, if I go to the index page again, it's just going to be the same blank page because I haven't added any of the code to display the list. But the one thing we are going to do at this point is, one of the things that the Gatsby development server makes available is a node browser. So for all the data that is associated with the website, it's available as a kind of as a tree that you can browse and view the individual nodes. And when you're running the development server, you can see the generated site at the root address, but there is this special URI that you can go to that will show you the data node browser for the application. So I'm going to go do that now. Oops, the slash. And oh, it's got some leftover information. I'll just clear that out for the time being. So you'll see something like this. And I know the database connection is working because there is this item in the tree labeled all MongoDB, and then the name of my database, and then the name of my collection. And I can expand that part of the tree, and I can expand the edges component, and then the node component, and I can identify the items that I am interested in. So I want to know what the subject is, what the course is, the title, and let's leave that for the time being. And then I can hit the play button in the middle column, and it will show me the contents of the database as it understands it. So it fetches those 5 records and just the subject, course, and title attributes. So I'm pretty confident now that I've got everything configured correctly, and the static site generator is actually going to be able to pull data from the database. One thing I'll just point out here with respect to this all MongoDB, whatever follows all MongoDB is going to be a little bit dependent on what you've named your database and what you've named your collection. So you may choose to use the same names, you may use different names. If they are different, then when you're working through this exercise, you should change this accordingly. Okay, now I'm going to make a copy of this query because I'm going to use this query on the index page to fetch for the data I need. So I'm just going to put that on my clipboard for the time being. And I'm going to go back to the index page for the application. So that's in the source pages folder and then the index file. So right now, pages in Gatsby are React components. So hopefully you'll remember that from Computer Science 2600. And what I'm going to add to this, so right now we've got the static headings. There is a placeholder for the body of the table, but now what we want to do is incorporate the actual data from the database. And there's essentially 2 things that I have to do in order to do that. The first is I have to bring in the GraphQL module that we'll use to query the database. So I'm going to add that as a module at the top. And then the second thing I need to do is add in the actual query at the bottom. So I'm going to paste the code for this. And so export const query equals GraphQL and then the backtick. And then what's in between the backticks is essentially all that code that I had copied from the middle column of the GraphIQL application. So this is identical to what's contained in there. And then the last thing I'm going to need to do, or 2 more things. I'm going to need to inject the query data into the render function. And the way we do that is we add in a parameter for the data. So the render function now has this parameter data. And then what we can do is now we can iterate over all the data and extract rows for the table from that data. And so I'll place that in the T-body section. So let me just grab the code for that and then I'll explain how it works. So there is the code for that. So the query fetches all the information about the courses, subject, course, and title. It puts that in an array, and that is located in the node array. And so the query basically parallels the JavaScript data structure that we're accessing here. So all MongoDB, CPSC 2650 courses, edges, node. Node is going to be an array of these types of values. And so inside the render function, we've got this data parameter which contains the results of the query. It has a MongoDB 2650 courses property. It has an edges property. It has a node, which is an array. And so what we are going to do is take that edge array and map each of the items within it. So a single node. And what we are going to do is for each of those nodes, we are going to generate an HTML table row. and we are going to pull out from each of those nodes the subject, the course, the title, and so on, and format them accordingly. We're also generating the link to the course detail page here as well. So that's basically how it works. So three parts to it. We need the GraphQL module. We need to specify the query that is going to pull the data that we're interested in. Then we inject the results into the render function, and then based on that result data, we generate content for the page. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So I can go ahead and save this page, and I will go back to the root page, the index page for the application. And now it has filled in the table based on the information that it's pulled from the database. What we haven't done though is set up the detailed page for a single course. So the links are there, but if I follow the links, I'm going to end up on an error page because we haven't configured the application to generate the detail pages for each of the courses in the database. So that's going to be our next step. And what we will do first is create a template page for the course detail. So in the source folder, I'm going to make a new folder and I'm going to call it templates. And in the templates folder, I'm going to make a new file and we'll call it course.js. And I'm going to put some code in there really just as a placeholder at this point. So I'm going to do a React page generation function or component generation function or page rendering function. And for the time being, I'm just putting in placeholders for where all that course detail information is going to be. Later on, when we have the information available, I'm going to replace this with JSX notation to extract the actual data for the particular course. But just so we have a placeholder now, I'm just making this simple static page. And in order to do this, we need to generate some information for each of the courses. So each of the courses has been pulled into the system as a node. What we are going to need to do, if we're going to generate pages for each of those nodes, we need to decorate the node with a slug, so the portion of the URL that's going to identify the unique page. That's the first thing we're going to do. So at the top level of the project, I'm going to create a new file. And if we are going to be processing nodes and generating pages, that code has to be placed in a specially named file, which is at the top level of the project, and it's called Gatsby node.js. And the first thing we're going to do is just display all of the nodes as they are generated, as the application runs, just so you can get a sense for what's going on. So I'm going to put a really simple function in here. So this is the onCreateNode function. And when you have an onCreateNode function in Gatsby Node.js, that function is called every time the system generates a new node. And what are we going to do in this case? We're just going to log out the type string that is associated with that node so that we can see all the nodes that are generated. And in order to see that, we are going to have to restart the development server. So I will do that now. And one of the unfortunate things is every time we make a change to Gatsby node.js, it really has to regenerate a lot of information. And you can see here, I'll just let it finish setting up. Okay, so the site is running. You can see here every time there's been a node that's been generated, we see a message on the console for that. The ones that I'm really interested in, so this is nodes of all different types, but the ones I'm really interested in are the nodes that are specific to each of our courses that is in the database. And you can see I'm logging out the internal type of each node, and the ones we're really interested in are these 5. So these nodes represent the 5 different courses that are in our database. So if we're going to be doing anything on the create node event, we only want to be doing anything in particular with these courses. So we're going to further refine this to only log the information when the node is of that type. So I'm just going to rewrite this function slightly. So more or less the same thing, but I'm only going to log the node internal type in the case that it is actually the type of node that we're interested in. So I'll save that and I will restart this. And now you can see in this case, we only get that log message only for those 5 course nodes. So that is that's what we're interested in. Okay, so now that we've convinced ourselves that we can process those nodes in particular, we're going to need to write the code to generate a URL slug for each of these pages. So we're going to have a standard URL format for the course detail page. It's going to be /course/ the subject code / the course number. So that is going to end up being the slug for each of these pages. And we are going to attach the information about the slug to each of those nodes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this function once again. And you can see what's going on. I mean, basically it's the onCreateNode function. There is a createNode field function which is part of the actions, which is one of the parameters passed to this function. We're going to need to use that because we're going to want to add an additional field to the node. So the node already has fields for the subject and the course number and the title and the credits and the description and so on, but we are going to want to add an additional field for the slug for the page. So the slug is going to be the /course, the node subject, and the node course. So we're going to add that in to the node. So I'll go ahead and save that, and we will have to restart the development server once again. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to the GraphIQL browser. And let's clear this stuff up, the old stuff. Just refresh this page. And now I'm going to be looking at these courses and the edges and the nodes. Now you can see there is a new collection of fields associated with the node. Well, there's only a single field, which is the slug. So let's have a look at that and run the query. And now you see all these nodes have this additional information, this slug field, that we're going to use when we go ahead and generate the page. Okay, so the next step then is to write the code to actually generate the pages. We're going to have to do a couple of things because this involves generating files in the file system. We're going to need to use the Node.js path module. So I'll bring that in. And then the next thing we're going to do is need to write the function that is going to be used to generate the pages. And so I'm going to paste that in at the bottom here. So in the same file, the Gatsby Node.js file. And I'm just going to kind of explain what's going on in this create pages function. So the onCreate node function gets called every time a new node is created in the system. The create pages function gets called pretty much when the system has done all its setup, and now it wants to go ahead and generate any additional pages that are required for the static site. And this function has two parts to it. The first thing is that it's going to query all of those slugs. So you'll notice that we kind of have a GraphQL query, just like we had on the index page. Although in this case, we're really only interested in the slug. That's kind of the key thing we need for generating the pages. So we're going to look through all the courses, through the edge, through an individual node, its fields property, but what we're mostly interested in is the slug. So this result we're going to get back is essentially going to be an array of these slug values. And then the second thing we need to do is, once we have that array of slugs, now we can go off and generate all the individual pages. So we've got that result. It has a data attribute, MongoDB CPSC 2650 courses. Edges, that is an array of nodes. So we want to go through each of those nodes and create a single page. So in our case, we've got those 5 courses. This edges array is going to consist of 5 nodes, and so we're going to create 5 new pages. And when we create a page, we have to pass in a number of parameters. The path, so this is going to be the URL path. That is going to come from the slug of the node. The component essentially identifies the template that we're using. And so remember, we wrote the source templates course.js file. So that is going to be the template that's used to generate an individual course detail file. And the other thing we have to do is we're going to have to pass in some information to that template so that it knows which course to generate the data for. And that's the purpose of the context property here. And we are going to pass in a value for slug, a variable slug, and it's going to have the same value as the slug property for the node itself. So when the template goes to render, we're going to have this additional piece of information. So I can go ahead and save that. So now if I restart the application, we should get all of the pages generated. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to restart it. And let's go back to the root page for the application. And there it is. So now I am able to follow these links to the course detail page. The only thing we're seeing right now is I didn't fill in the code for the template to get the actual data for the course. So now what we're seeing is basically the same page for every course. So the last step is going to be to modify that template file to actually inject the actual data associated with a particular course. So here we are, we're on the page for course Computer Science 1045, but it's just showing the static template. So we'd want it to show the actual detail for that course. So that's going to be the last step of this process. And so let's go back to the shell. And we are going to have to modify the template. So I can close that. We're done with that. Done with that. Done with that. So the last thing we have to do is kind of finish this template so that it shows the actual course data. So 3 things we're going to have to do. We're going to have to bring in GraphQL to the template. So I'll add that at the top. We are going to have to query the database for the detail of the particular course. So that's going to go at the bottom. So just like on the index page, we had a query to get the information about all the courses. So on the index page, we got just subject, course, and title. So we could have that brief table. On the course detail page, we want to know the subject, course, title, the number of credits, and the description. We want to display all that information. The query is a little bit different here. And you'll notice that the query has a parameter, the $slug parameter, and that is, maybe I closed that other file too soon. Let me reopen this. So that parameter is coming from here. So when we call the create page function, we are passing in the actual page slug as the slug property to the context, and that's what's going to show up here. So that becomes a parameter for this query. So in this case, we want the information for a single course. So from the database, we want the information for a single course where the field's slug is equal to this $slug value. So whatever was passed in when the create page function was called, we want to get the data for that particular page. So if it's the slug is /course/CPSC/1045, we only want these details for that particular course. That's the purpose of this structure. And then the third thing we have to do now is use that data in the render function for the course. I'm just going to copy in the update there so you can see what that looks like. So I'm going to replace the existing render function with something that actually uses the queried data. And it's just like the index page. So there's this data parameter to the render function. We don't want to specify data MongoDB CPSC 2650 courses every single time, so we just create a shortcut local variable for that. And then in the HTML, we inject the content from this object. So for the title, it's going to be the subject, number, and the course title. In the body of the table itself, we're going to have a row for each of the subject, course, title, the credits, the description, and so on. Those values being pulled from the object that we've got the data for. So let's go ahead and save this. And I'm not sure whether we have to restart or just refresh here. Perfect. Just do a refresh. So I'm on the same page, but we modified the template so that it showed the actual data. If I go back to the list and I go to another course, then we end up seeing the data for that course. Okay. The last thing we need to do with respect to this application is actually generate the static site. Right now we're running Gatsby with the development server, and that allows us to make changes to the code and have them see them reflected dynamically in the browser. But what we'd want to do when deploying this to production is actually generate the static files, or the static site, the static HTML files, the simple HTML files that are going to be deployed to the production web servers. So we will do that now, and once we've got everything working, this is a pretty easy step. So I'm going to stop the development server, and I'm just going to run Gatsby build. And this will generate the actual static HTML site. And this one's pretty small. Hopefully it won't take too long. Okay, and I'm just going to browse the public HTML folder here for you. So when we run Gatsby build, it places all the static files in the public folder of the project folder. And really what I want to highlight for you here is the course folder. So you can see all these static pages have been generated. And these are, again, just really basic HTML with the actual contents that we've pulled from the database and rendered as static HTML. So this public folder contains the complete site. It's got the index page plus all the course detailed pages contained within it. If I want to test and just confirm that that site is really going to work as expected, I can use the Gatsby serve command, and I can specify the port. And so Gatsby serve is a really basic web server. It just serves static HTML files, and so I can make sure that everything's working. So, I mean, it'll all look the same, but this is serving the actual static HTML. And let's just check a few more of these. Yeah, everything looks good. Okay. And then the final thing we would probably want to do, so after we're satisfied that our static site is working, we'd probably want to deploy it to a production host to make it available to the public. There are a wide variety of options for hosting static websites. We're just going to use Firebase hosting in this case because it's fairly straightforward to use. So the way this would work is I would there's some links in the text description of the walkthrough, but you would go to firebase.google.com. You would log in or sign up with your Google account. It's fairly straightforward. Once that's done, you can go to the Firebase console, and it will list all your projects. You would create a new hosting project for this. So I'm going to call this Courses 2. It's going to ask me to enable Google Analytics for this project. At this stage, that's going to cause us more trouble than help. So I'm going to disable that and go ahead and create the project. And then the project is ready. I'm going to click on hosting, and then there's some information there about how to do it. And I'm just going to walk you through it. It's pretty straightforward. And I am just going to stop the Gatsby server, and what we are going to do is we're going to have to install the Firebase CLI tools. So the command, I'm just going to check. I don't think these are here already, are they? Oh, they are here, so I don't have to reinstall those. But if you are going to, if you were going to do it, it would look like that. The details are in the walkthrough instructions. I've already got them, so I'm not going to do that part. The other part I'm not going to do is I'm already logged in, but you would have to log into Firebase yourself. So that's the command for that, Firebase login. No local host because we are actually, this console is not on our local machine, it's on a virtual machine in the cloud. If you run it this way, it's going to give you a URL. You'll have to copy and paste it into a new tab in the browser. You'll probably have to log into your Google account or select the Google account. It's going to produce a token, which then you paste back into the terminal, and then it authenticates you for that. So pretty straightforward. But what I am going to do for this project is, so once you do all that, the authentication and the logging in, we're going to have to initialize Firebase for this project. So in the project directory, so in this case Gatsby Courses 2, I'm going to type Firebase in it, and it's going to ask me a few questions. So the Firebase suite consists of a lot of different products. We're really only going to be using the hosting product, so I'm just going to move down to hosting, press the space bar to select that. I already created the project in the console, the Firebase console, so I'm going to choose to use an existing project, and it is the Courses 2 project. And what directory contains the static files? It's the public directory. That's the default one, so no changes there. And it's asking to configure as a single page app. So the answer to that is no. And so it writes a 404 file because there wasn't one there. It recognizes that that public folder already has an index page in there, and it's asking if it should overwrite it. We don't want it to overwrite it. That is our index page, and so we leave that alone. So that sets up Firebase for the project. And then the last thing to do is deploy the site. So the command for that is Firebase deploy. And it goes off and uploads the static files to the Firebase hosting servers. At the end of that process, it does give you a URL. So this is a public URL for your static site. So I should be able to click on this, and fingers crossed, we'll be able to see the static site. So now when I click through these links, it's actually these are publicly available links and pages, and it represents the static hosting of that application. And so that is it for static hosting or static site generation with Gatsby and static site hosting with Firebase.